occupation for the camera?
Absolutely. Derek Michael Terry, or Mr. Terry. I am a high school teacher here at Santa Fe Trail. I teach a variety of subjects: film, theater, speech, communication.
My name is Lauren Kraft.
My name is, to the camera. My name is Jesse Craig, and I am a sales associate at Spencer's in Topeka, Kansas.
Ryan Sweeney, and I'm currently unemployed.
So I understand that you were a student here at the time Summit was being used, correct?
That is correct.
Yeah.
For a few months, yes, because I moved here from California.
We have a few questions here on the topic of Summit Learning, a program we used a few years ago
Okay.
for our learning that, say, most teachers and students didn't necessarily agree with.
Okay. Yep.
So, how did it affect your teaching if it had an effect?
On mine personally, so really not a lot. So I'm an electives teacher. The only required course that I teach is oral communication, which is a rotation class, 9 weeks rotation class. So I feel that Summit affected more of the core teachers just because of the way it's set up. You know, most of my classes are hands-on project-based learning courses. So having everything put online isn't really an option for me, nor would I want that. As far as how it did affect me, so like during AP, trail time, specifically trail time, our jobs were during that hour to check in on the students, see where their progress was, and I had to do that every day. But as far as actually like getting in and working with it with grades and posting assignments, I did not do that at all. So I kind of had like an outsider's perspective, outside looking.
How did Summit affect your learning and personally?
Personally, Summit was never much on grades per se, but Summit was more of a app used for you select your answers, you don't type them out. It makes it very easy to cheat, and they give you multiple chances to keep going. So it makes it very easy to be able to cheat your way through and get good grades no matter what way you take.
My learning personally, my view on Summit is extremely what's the word I'm looking for? Unpopular. I have a very unpopular opinion on Summit. Because for me, Summit kind of, it kind of helped me in a way. It was really easy. And, I got through it really fast. And I think that quick-paced kind of summer school type vibe really helped me to get through it. Not necessarily, it didn't help me understand anything. It just helped me get through it. And I don't know if that was just because of how easy it was to cheat on Summit. I just remember it being really quick and easy.
While you were using Summit, do you believe that you learned anything or moved up skill-wise?
No, I believe that I stayed exactly where I was. It felt like Summit was a place stopper. Throughout all 4 quarters, we never changed our subject. It was always the same thing. It never felt right doing the same thing for the whole year.
Considering I don't even remember what the format of the home screen was, I would say I didn't learn much. I definitely think it helped me move up in terms of grades, because that was one of the only high school, well, it wasn't even in high school. That was one of the only years I did really well in grades, because I was that's just kind of how I learn. I don't learn well from just sitting at a computer in front of my face and saying do this, but the fact that, because this was during COVID, we was at home, I was on my own time, I was this, that, the third, I could listen to music while I worked, I could go upstairs, get food, whatever I wanted. That was what worked best for me, but Summit didn't help me really learn anything. I'm sorry, that was a really roundabout way to answer that question. I didn't mean to ramble like that.
How do you think it affected your relationships with your teachers and other peers?
It did cause a huge downward spike for me and the teachers that I was close with, as I could see they were really feeling more down and out of it because they had nothing to do. They were being paid for nothing. And while some people would enjoy to be paid for nothing, teachers do this because they love to educate people. And them not being able to educate made them feel entirely useless.
It did, but not in the way that you think. It didn't affect it negatively or positively. It just kind of, it didn't really, I guess what I'm trying to say, it didn't really affect my personal, not really personal, like school or personal relationship with my teachers. Like, it didn't affect how I viewed them or anything of that sort. It more affected who I could contact. Because of Summit, like, all of my favorite teachers left because of Summit. And I can name them all right now. That was Miss Dobbs, Miss Dahl, and Miss Riggs. Now, Miss Riggs didn't leave because of Summit. Miss Riggs retired, I believe. Miss Dobbs left because of Summit. She went to a different school. Miss Dahl left because of Summit, and she went to a different school. And Miss Dahl even still runs the, like, some kind of sport here. I'm not even sure what it is. I think it's like softball or something of that sort. But that kind of affected, like, how I could contact them, because I couldn't talk to them anymore. I can't email them.
About this?
Yeah. So, me specifically, I mean, since like I said, I'm a elective teacher, I didn't really hear a lot of it personally directed toward me. But, as I'm sure you guys will explore in this documentary, the school had huge backlashes. I mean, for context, the size of a school board meeting before Summit was about 15 to 20. And that's including all the principals, vice principals, anyone who's like presenting something at that specific school board meeting. After Summit was implemented, it was more like 300 to 500 people. Yelling and screaming and starting arguments and fighting and talking over each other, and that was just at the school board meetings, not to mention the calls for people to get fired, the walkouts, the coordinated walkouts at the junior high and really at the high school. It didn't really go over that well at the high school. Not a lot of people joined, but it still happened. Shirts were made. People left the district, like literally left the district to go to other schools and never came back. People did get fired. People left. I mean, teachers left this district en masse during all of this. It was a rough time to be a Santa Fe Trail educator. It felt very hostile towards us. And I felt like even since then, the optics, the way people in the community, the parents especially, the way that they look at us educators was very diminished. I mean, I've been a teacher for 10 years. I've been in education for 15 to 16 years, and I've never felt so disrespected in my life. It was hard to sit through. I mean, we don't get paid a lot of money. I mean, we're in this because of you all. Like, we love educating and teaching kids and building relationships, and to be treated like that in that capacity was it was heartbreaking and really disrespectful.
All right, and that's all that we have for you.
Okay.
How about your relationship with your peers? How did Summit affect that?
It didn't affect it much, but it definitely did bring us closer and united us more.
Because, like, common interests, or, like, kind of thing, or, like, more of a common problem?
Common problem.
Do you think it was fair to teachers to have to transfer over to Summit?
Absolutely not. The teachers never agreed to this, which I believe was complete and totally wrong of them, because the people who choose what we do for education do none of the teaching, therefore I believe they should not have a say in it. The people that do the teaching should have a say in it. They should be able to decide if they want to teach hands-on or if they want to give them an assignment on the computer and make them watch a video. it is not the school board's choice, in my opinion. They should not be allowed to pick something for all students and teachers to have to use as a resource when it is not agreed upon by that teacher, because, as I said before, it makes them feel useless.
I don't think it was fair to the teachers at all, because it kind of took the job out of their hands and put it in the hands of Summit. It left them very little to do other than help us. Because the courses on Summit, I'm pretty sure, were chosen by our teachers in some kind of aspect, but they were not taught by our teachers or, anything of that. Like, our teachers didn't put that in front of us and say, here it is. That was, Summit teaching us. They weren't teaching us. So it took their job away from them and just kind of, especially a lot of teachers at Santa Fe Trail, they love teaching. They're here because they love kids, they love educating, but Summit didn't allow them to educate or do what they love because they just put a computer in front of us. Not to throw shade, but it's what Mr. Fawcett does. Says, okay, slideshow, sit down, do it, I'm going to play some music. He doesn't do his job, but he doesn't love his job, like some of the other teachers did who actually wanted to do their job and couldn't.
Yes and no. No in the way that I think they should have had at least some opinion, but yes in the way that I understand this was a last-minute decision because COVID happened and they needed something to teach to their kids, and they needed a platform, they needed a program, and Summit just so happened to come out around the same time and become bigger, so Summit was really the best option that they had. Now, I understand that you helped out with a protest that took place in the middle school, is that correct?
Correct.
So how did that go, and how do you think that either affected the situation positively or negatively?
It definitely helped the situation positively. It initially had started with me and one of my teachers, who I shall not name for reasons. We were talking about Summit and how it felt so all online, because that's what it was. It felt like we were doing nothing to actually learn, because the only way that you can learn is by doing stuff hands-on and not being handed the answer. So through that, I decided that I was going to make a group of people to share this idea with, and then it went from one person to another, and then eventually it spread across the whole school. We had a date to set up on what we were going to do for it, and so we had our protest. Everyone stood outside from 8 a.m. when school started to 3:20 until school ended. We never stopped. We stood out there. We kept our quote that we were saying was respect for our teachers, because from that point we did not care what we were doing. We cared about our teachers, because we could see they were unhappy and that they were willing to leave their jobs for happiness.
And do you think this helped end Summit in the district?
I believe it did, because around noon that same day, the superintendent came out and said that he was going to talk to the school board about removing it. So we still stood out there, and we went through everything. We went through a whole day where we stood outside in freezing cold weather, just so that way our teachers could feel happy doing what they were doing. And some people from the high school even walked all the way down to the elementary school, or the middle school, to join us. We had WIBW come over to the school, and they interviewed us on why this all was happening. I believe that if we would not have spoken up like we were supposed to, and we spoke for the people who didn't have a choice and had to stay quiet, otherwise they would risk losing their job, I believe if we didn't do that, we would still be doing something that the teachers didn't enjoy to this day. And lots of other teachers probably would have left.
Any final closing statements?
I believe that's it.
How did Summit compare to where you used to live?
So I lived in California, and when COVID hit in California, they didn't use Summit at all. Summit didn't exist. I didn't even know Summit was a thing until I moved here. In California, it was all on Zoom and Google Classroom. That is what we used. That's all we used. We didn't use any other websites or anything. And eventually when I even moved, started going to school again, they still didn't use it. It was just half days, and you'd do half your classes one day and half the next. But still, it was non-existent. And even when I started going full-time at the high school there, it was all just in person again. Just all the only difference was a mask. And I mean, that was here too. When I first moved here, you had a mask. But Summit existed. In my English class, math class, and maybe a couple others, Summit was a big thing. And so that really confused me because I was like, okay, well, why don't they just use Classroom? And why did they just use Zoom and stuff? Why did they pick this and just not something else that would be easier? So it was definitely a change, but I don't say it'd be a horrible change because it did make sense a bit, if that makes sense.
Now, do you feel that Summit was too easy, too hard, or did you feel like you grew or learned anything while using this?
I didn't grow at all while using it, but I also didn't decline. So I think it was just kind of just there, if that makes sense. It didn't really affect me negatively or positively. I heard a lot of people hated it. I heard some people loved it. I didn't really have an opinion because, again, I only used it for half a year when I moved here. So I didn't really get to use it as much as everybody else, so I never really learned whether or not this or that, blah, blah, blah. So I'd just say neutral for me personally.
Now, comparing using Summit to the way that you learn now, which one would you say that you prefer?
Definitely how I learn now, because I require more hands-on stuff. Meanwhile, with Summit, it was less hands-on, and I didn't really get to do that.
Now, overall, how did it affect you in any way?
I don't think it affected me too much. I think some things were difficult, it was a difficult website for me to navigate, but in the long run, I think it helped me a bit in English. Math, it sucked. I couldn't figure it out at all, but English, it went pretty smoothly.
How do you think that this affected the teachers?
I think it was different for every teacher. I think some teachers loved it. I think some teachers hated it. I think it was helpful for some. I think it was just a curse for others.
Now, if it did, how did it affect your family?
I have a 15-year-old daughter. She's a sophomore, Jade, and then a 13-year-old daughter, Tegan. She's a 7th grader. But when we were in Summit, I believe Jade was in 8th grade, and Tegan was in 5th grade. So they did use it. They didn't love it, but they certainly didn't hate it either. I mean, they saw some positives and some negatives from it. The thing is that it was implemented, it was rushed through as a response to COVID, right? So COVID happened, we had to leave, we didn't come back to school for several months. We needed an option in case we were ever quarantined again for that next year. And so it's all online. And obviously that next year after COVID, there were some people that stayed home some of the time, the full time, and then maybe had to go home to do that. So because they were infected or whatever. Jade and Tegan never were infected during that year, if I'm not mistaken. So they didn't get COVID. So the process of using Summit was definitely in the classroom, but then it's some of that in-person teaching became more digital. And my youngest daughter Tegan, she wants to go into graphic design, so she's a little more computer savvy, technology savvy, so she didn't mind it too much. Jay didn't really like it because it kind of took away the personal experience of a relationship with the teacher, and a tactile learning environment where you have your hands on a specific assignment, a specific project, and you're able to, do these things with it physically. So I wouldn't say that it was, excuse me, a detrimental. Like there wasn't anything detrimental that happened to them specifically.